There's no definition of standard of care, and there's no measurement of quality versus standard. And so what we've really been doing a lot of these days is helping, we do this still, the full analysis, and we're really focusing more on how can we really transform quality of patient care, starting with hygiene. And we know that when we drive hygiene improvement and patient care improvement, we drive higher production per visit.
Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Before we dive in, a quick request. If you enjoy the show, which hopefully you do since you're listening to it right now, if you could like, subscribe, or leave a review, it really helps us reach more dental professionals and bring top-tier insights to the industry. Today, I'm excited to welcome Elliot Zibel, a leader in healthcare and finance. Over the past 20 years, he's been an investor, an operator, and an entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of ClariFi Health, a business intelligence and AI-driven analytics company transforming how dental groups leverage data to improve patient care and profitability. Before that, so he speaks from experience, he founded Select Dental Management, scaling it from 0 to 40 locations in 5 years, also earning it a spot as the fastest growing dental group on the Inc. 5000 list. Elliot, really great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing good. That was a mouthful for you. Thanks for getting through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a problem. Well, always appreciate our conversations. I don't know that you and I have ever talked about how you got into dental initially in the first place and what led you to founding Select. So maybe you could just kind of take a step back and share a little bit about your dental origin story.
Yeah, no, it's I never thought I would be in dental, so it's a good question. So I spent 15 years in the hedge fund private equity space prior to founding Select Dental Management, and the way I got into dental is a good friend of mine who was one of my co-founders is a dentist, and he had purchased a practice in 2015 and had grown it substantially, and told me about it. And when I looked into how he had grown the business, he had really done it from improving patient care and patient experience. And I said to him, maybe we could do this at scale with more locations. Did a bunch of research on the industry. There's a lot to like in dental. It's a large $150 billion market, growing 3, 4, 5% a year, recession resistant. And so all of those things are attractive. And most importantly, from an acquisition perspective, when I entered the market, the DSO penetration rate was mid-single digits. And when you looked at other healthcare verticals, the penetration rates were in 50, 60, 70%. So it felt like there was a long, runway for inorganic growth. And obviously as we started consolidating, really wanted to make sure we weren't just acquiring assets and, aggregating them like trophies on a shelf, but our focus was really how can we really make these businesses fundamentally better and really do that by improving patient care and experience.
So as you think back to your time at Select, now that you've kind of had some space in between and founded another company, ClariFi Health, which we'll talk about here in a second, what are some of the things that you think you did really well? And what are some of the things that as you reflect, you're I wish that I did that a little bit differently?
Yeah, there's a lot more on the I think I should have done it differently list than the things I think I did really well, honestly. So, starting with the things I would do differently, it seemed we could just grow at whatever rate we want to grow. And, we had a very, fast acquisition pace. It was too fast. When you're growing at that rate, it's really hard to manage your overall organization and to manage the practices that you're bringing on. So number one would be, grow at a slower rate and a more comfortable pace. Number two, less financial leverage. I think a lot of people would agree with me on that part of the story. Wanted to preserve equity for myself and my partners. But there's always a trade-off between ownership and leverage and risk. So that got to be really interesting in 2022 when labor inflation hit. And thirdly, I think this pertains a little bit to ClariFi and to Denticom as well of I did not have the data I needed to make decisions at scale. And I didn't really understand what it looked like to have a truly data-driven organization. And there's not quite honestly that many of them within dental. But the inability to get the data from your PMS systems, right, plural, then, your HR system, then your finance system, then your supply data and your lab data, and marketing's over here. And it's like, how do I actually, set strategy and hold people accountable? Because once you start getting the business to, a higher level, and, we can maybe talk about some of the things that I did well as well. But, it really becomes a question of, do you have the data to be able to identify opportunity, to prioritize the things that really matter, make sure people are dialed in, focused, and lastly, to really drive execution. And that execution has to come not just like it's a dashboard, or BI that people like to say that's only used by, your corporate leadership team, but doesn't go to the practices or to the providers, is not effective. Just not, right? And so I think I didn't have the data strategy until much later on, as CEO of the company, to really be able to predictably drive growth in a way that, allowed me to really dial in and drive, same store revenue growth. And so, on the positive side, like, we got the culture right. When we looked at the business, when I started for the right reasons. I said, listen, I learned about DSOs, and what I realized was that DSOs had not grown organically really in the history of DSOs when I entered the business in 2018. And I looked at a bunch of different larger groups, and a bunch of different, industry research and so on. And the reason was, when I looked a layer deeper, was there was a 98% correlation between doctor retention and same store revenue growth and same store EBITDA growth. And so I saw that, and I'm like, that obviously makes sense. Like, just as a customer, do you want to go see a different dentist every other year? Probably not. And so, I basically said, hey, like, how do we make this like a provider centric model? Meaning that, what do doctors want, and what do the doctors that we want to partner with want? And for us, they wanted to grow. They wanted to, improve as clinicians. They wanted to, obviously earn a great living. And for us, part of it was like, they also wanted to be owners. And so we had a big belief in having, we were like a very early adopter of like this DPO model that I think is like overused in a very, broad term these days. But our view was like, how can we have our cake and eat it too? So how can we partner with great providers and great locations, not blow them up and drive all this turnover that drives, challenges, but actually collaborate and work together to really grow the location in a collaborative and provider and patient centric way. And so, that really helped us a lot, because of all the mistakes we made. We had 96% doctor retention, which is, some of the better numbers I've seen. And guess what that drove? 90% hygienist retention, 92% patient retention. And ultimately, when you have a bucket that doesn't have a big hole in the bottom of it, I see people spending all this money on marketing and worrying about, ROI. And I didn't really have to worry about that, because we retained our patients. So we didn't have, like, our issue was capacity. Like, can we actually serve them? Right. And so, I think that getting the retention right, which really starts with culture and having like clear mission, vision, and values, and like really living by those. I know you had Steve Bill on the call the other day, but it's like, every decision you make, if you say your values are A, B, and C, and D, and then you go and make decisions that are contrary, then nobody cares, and nobody believes it, and it doesn't drive your organization. So we did a good job of, really being focused on, I think, the right things at a high level, and that engendered loyalty and stability. And, ultimately we were able to drive, mid-teens organic growth annually, and on a revenue basis, and more so on an EBITDA basis. Now, that wasn't exactly linear, but over time, I think, the business has really added a lot of value. And the nice thing about it is, the thing I like about dentistry is being able to do that on a, by improving patient care. Right. And to me, it's like, I started out being provider centric. I then went to being patient centric. And then I said, well, we're really people centric, because we need great teams to provide great care. And a doctor can't do the dentistry by themselves, right? It's a team game. And so, it feels good that, all of that improvement was driven by providing better care and experience for patients, just like my partner did when he started this business.
Yeah, it's great when you can be in a business where there's profit and purpose. So you had this experience at Select, and you got to kind of see firsthand the challenges that existed related to data that was actually actionable, being readily available at your fingertips, which I think led you to found ClariFi. So can you share a little bit about, how you came to that decision to found a technology, not I don't know if I want to use the words analytics company, because I think you have some strong feelings about, the actual usage of analytics and this kind of a little bit more business management. But share a little bit about the journey. Like how did you determine that this was something that you wanted to do? Where did you get the confidence that, hey, I went from founding and running a dental service organization. Now let me go to founding and building a technology company?
Yeah, good question. So that experience in 22 was a really humbling experience. Like we were kind of on top of the world, and then got our legs kind of taken out from underneath us. And thankfully, we had been investing in building a data warehouse prior to that. We spent a lot of money on building this data warehouse, and it promised to be this amazing piece of technology. And quite honestly, when we got it, it was, if I thought it would be 100 out of 100 functionality wise, it was like a 12 out of 100. Right. So that was not awesome, but even with that 12% functionality, we were able to start taking the business to another level, and not just, growing because we knew how to grow broadly, but really just saying, hey, you know what, we're going to start focusing on improving diagnostics. So we're going to say, now we're going to focus on making sure we have standards, from FMX and Panorex and Bite Wings. And now we're going to see if are we actually achieving the quality we're looking to achieve. And if we're not, we identified opportunities and figured out, hey, if we close this gap on making sure 100% of our patients get an FMX every 5 years, and starting out at 70%, we can drive an extra $3 million of revenue and 2.5 of EBITDA. And so we started being able to really dial in on like quantifying the opportunities on an EBITDA basis, and then driving execution with, consistent reporting, even though, there's still definitely a manual component to it, when we started. And really what we saw was after the hit in 22, and we were able to drive over the past 2 years, like 30% revenue growth and like 60% EBITDA growth, just from being able to like empower, again, a strong leadership team, and, with good culture and buy-in. So let's not take all that for granted. But when you have that base in place and you're able to layer on top of it, why are we doing this? How are we going to do it? Who's accountable? Also put incentives in place so everybody's rewarded for providing that outcome. We were really able to dial in. And so when I saw that happen, it was like magic. And I was like, wow, this is so much easier, right? And I had started to learn from some other experiences on boards and stuff around like, what does it look like in other industries? And honestly, it looks a lot better. It looks a lot better than what we're doing in dental today, from a data management perspective. So I sort of had this view of when I left, I was like, hey, there's so many different things there's a lot of problems I think I could solve. And clearly I had the entrepreneurial bug at this point. And the one I felt like the most, I thought was the biggest opportunity, and frankly, one of the bigger challenges too, was, can I help companies become data driven without having to spend all this money and time and effort on data consolidation and normalization and standardization? Can I just give them like the answers, not just the raw data sets, right? And that's when we talk about like analytics. Like to me, like I'm a numbers guy. Like I spent, I've analyzed thousands of companies in my life. Like that's what I do. So I can take a huge data set and make sense of it, right? But I'm like probably fewer and far between, in the dental world, and ultimately, having a static dashboard with like yesterday's news in a way that isn't like actionable is not value add. Like, it's a cost center. It's a data cost center. It's a cost of doing business. But what I found in my business was like we were able to take that from a cost center to a value driver. And having known a lot of other CEOs, and I've been dealing with this problem for, by the way, 5 or 6 years, talking to every analytics company in the industry, talking to them about my perspective, which is, I'm not shy to give my opinion, whether it's right or wrong. I always caveat, it's not necessarily right, but it's my opinion. But I had an opinion, like for the folks that were really doing like enterprise pretty well, I was like, well, you got to get down to the practice and provider level. And the folks that were doing provider or kind of single location reporting, well, I was like, well, you got to get it to enterprise because we need both, right? And ultimately, as technology changed, I just thought that, it's not just about PMS data. That's part of it. And that's probably the most valuable data set. But, now we have X-ray AI, we've got finance, we've got HR. And as a leader, I want all that information in one area so I can access it. But I want to know, like, where do I focus, right? That's the challenge. Like, where do I start? And so started ClariFi about a year ago, to really help transform, the patient care and earnings power of dental groups. And it's been a really interesting journey, and working with lots of different data sets and lots of different CEOs of dental groups. I probably talked to like at least 100, maybe more dental group CEOs over the past year, and learned how they're doing, what they're doing with data, what's working, what's not for them. And we are on a journey to simplify and to help them, have the information to make, informed and data-driven decisions. And what we found is the same thing we found at Select: is once you give smart people the information, they make the right decisions and they can drive substantial growth in their business. And we could talk about some of the things like we've seen as like common factors of opportunity, because the way we start out is we take a look and we have all the benchmark data. So we have all of your data, but then I have the benchmark data. So again, FMX, right? I know that, hey, on average, a dental group will have 80% of patients getting an FMX every 5 years. And if I look at your data and it's 43%, I'm looking at the variance between that 80 and 43 to quantify not just the production opportunity, but the EBITDA opportunity, right? And so we started out by kind of agnostic, being like, well, we're going to do that for your financials. So supply expense, we'll do that for PMS data, we'll do that for call answer rates, we'll do that for HR and open positions. And what I started to realize like pretty quickly was like the top 5 categories were always from the PMS, and we're always in preventative care services, AKA hygiene. So like, that's interesting. I wonder why that is. And what I started to realize was that, dental is unique in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways it's super unique is that in most parts of healthcare, Medicare is a major payer. And Medicare has something called value-based care, right? Where they're actually compensating, providers and hospitals and so on the quality of care. And they're saying to hospitals, hey, if your readmission rate or people coming back to hospitals is above X, you're going to get less. If it's, below, then you get Y, and we're going to pay you more. And so they've driven this focus on quality of care. Now in dental, we don't have Medicare. And so we don't have focus on quality of care. And so it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks a couple of months ago. I was like, why am I doing all this other stuff when the reality of it is the same stuff I found at Select that we drove to drive, improvement is the same things I'm finding at every other DSO. And really it stems from the fact that there's no definition of standard of care and there's no measurement of quality versus standard. And so what we've really been doing a lot of these days is helping, we do this still, the full analysis, and, we're really focusing more on how can we really transform quality of patient care, right? Starting with hygiene. And we know that when we drive hygiene improvement and patient care improvement, we drive higher production per visit, higher provider productivity. And the nice thing about hygiene is that $1 of incremental revenue from an ancillary service is flowing through at a very high profit margin. So it's that kind of panacea of win for the patient, win for the provider, win for the business, right? But doing that in a patient-centric way. So we've really evolved, and we're actually launching, we've launched a new product, which is a hygiene-focused product, which is really meant to be almost like a co-pilot for your clinical leader. And when I think about like automation and AI, and we can geek out about that stuff, thought a lot about it. And we have certainly a lot incorporated into our business. But I mean, the job of a clinical leader in my mind is define standards, measure versus standards, identify outliers, improve outlier performance, right? Improve outlier productivity. That's what, when I had my partner as a chief clinical officer, I was like, man, like help make sure we're providing great care and we're providing, at least standard of care, and that we're able to continue improving care over time. And his response is always like, well, how do I measure it? And like, I couldn't get him the data to do that. And we weren't even close to being able to do the stuff that we're doing now, like really digging deep into the EHRs and, and also the extra AI data sets to be able to like put it all together and say, hey, I can actually tell you exactly what percentage of patients that have perio are being diagnosed by provider, by location. And I can start flagging for you, those cases that you should be reviewing, rather than just like randomly, I'm going to review a chart and like, it's going to be Mary and this chart. Like, no, it's this chart because we found that this patient had 6 millimeters of bone loss. You probed them. They probed at 7 millimeter pockets. They're smokers. They lost 8 teeth. And like, I don't know, I'm not a clinician. I always say that, but like, you think you should take a look at this, right? Based on your clinical standards, not mine. And so what we're really finding is that, what gets measured gets managed, and we're not measuring quality of care in dental.
Yep. What I like about what you're saying and the examples that you provide are they're very actionable examples. And so I think, you mentioned needing to get down to the provider and the patient level. And then, of course, there's the enterprise level. And I think that a lot of focus on quote unquote analytics is at that kind of corporate level where you've got somebody sitting in an office that's not in the practices going, are we growing or are we shrinking? Are we doing more production or less? Have we seen more patients or less? And it stays very high level, but there's no notion of like what you do to fix any of those things when you're just viewing the data from that set. And then, you're talking about the FMX piece with every 5 years. And that's something that, because of the time horizon, 5 years is often probably not viewed frequently in order to get an understanding of, are we actually capturing this available treatment and by extension production source. And so you really get to like specificity in what you're talking about. And every time I've talked to you about things like at the conferences and stuff, you bring up something that I'm like, wait, that feels a little obscure, but it's not actually obscure if you are actually looking at it in terms of the care and the standard of care, as you talk about, and the opportunities. Like that's where the gold is, right? Like that's where the opportunity for growth really exists. It's not all the way up here at that high level.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point around, like, I call it change management. And I know Jill was on your pod, Jill Nesbitt, not so long ago. And Jill helped me with like onboarding and customer success strategies. And the hardest part, it's super easy. Like, I can come into any dental group if you have the numbers, and I can tell you in minutes where your opportunities are. That's not going to drive any improvement for you at all. The challenge, especially in dental, and this is the thing I think people don't fully, I didn't understand when I started. It's like, okay, I have 800 employees in 50 locations in 8 states. Okay. All, by the way, we're partnership model, so everyone's got a little bit of a different, or a lot of a different twist on, maybe they're doing implants, maybe they're doing this way. So how do I get them all on the same page? Not every single thing they're doing, but on the 3 strategic things that we're really trying to drive throughout the business. That is the challenge. And so when I think about, like, that's why I like the analytics thing. I'm like, analytics, like, dashboards are dead, man. Like, dashboards are like 1995. Like, okay, great. Like, this happened. Cool. Like, we need to know it, but that's not really what like modern technology is solving, right? Modern technology is solving, like, what's the problem and how do we automate the solution to it? Right. And that's what you can do with, we can use AI. It's overused, but you don't even need AI. You need rules-based decision-making, or whatever you want to call it. And so what I start out with is like, okay, cool. Like, that's the opportunity. But then, like, really getting more involved and, incorporating more of this in the product. It's like, okay, if we're going to do FMX, do you have a hygiene leader? If you don't, that's a problem. Do you have an incentive plan? If you don't, that's a problem. So we're incorporating that into our product too, around, hey, here's how you design bonus plans, and here's your JD for your hygiene leader. And then it becomes down to like, what are we actually giving to the hygienist to help them understand? So right now, I guarantee you, I've almost never seen it. I don't even think I know of any, maybe there's one, I can't think of it off the top of my head, that are actually showing hygienists how they're performing on quality of care. Like, because no one's measuring it. And if they're measuring it, they're not sharing it. And so now you have these hygienists that are sitting in a location that honestly probably have no idea what they're doing well and what they're not doing.
When you say quality of care with the hygienists, what are some of the examples of what that means? Yeah.
So again, non-clinician, but it's FMX every 4 to 5 years, or Panorex, whatever you're, depending on your age. It's perio probing annually. It's adult fluoride per ADA recommendations based on the Camber risk assessment and 2 or more high risk factors. It is, thinking about sealants and curidons when there's, incipient lesions, that are detected from X-ray AI. It's perio, diagnosing perio and when there's 2 millimeters or more of bone loss, right? So there is a lot of everyone always say it's black and white. You go to 20 dentists, 20 different things. I get that. But there are enough things, particularly on the hygiene side, that are just numerical. And so I can sit there, and what I found is like, I have over half of patients aren't getting perio probed every year. That's the reality. Like, nobody's looked at the data. Tell me if you ever heard anyone talk about perio probing percentages, but everyone complains about their perio visit percentage not being, we know 50% of Americans in the US over 30 at perio, yet what I see is like 15, maybe 20% on average of adult patients in perio programs. And we're like, why can't we fix that? Well, guess what? The leading indicator, if they're not probing, what are we doing? Right? Like, that's the way we diagnose it. So I think like we always try to like get down to like, what is the leading indicator for what we're trying to move? And like perio visit percentage is a lagging indicator. But what I want to see, and this is what we're using X-ray AI data for, is to say, now I know the bone loss from X-ray AI. I can now compare that and say, hey, Mary saw 50 patients last month with perio. She diagnosed perio in 10 of those 50. And so now I can really start to again, and again, what's the standard of care? What we're actually allowing people to do is customize their standards, because I've met enough clinicians to know maybe it's 2, maybe it's 2.5, maybe it's, I don't know the answer, and I don't want to get into that debate with people. But so we allow you to like customize, what your standards are. And that's where we're starting, right? We're starting more on the perio diagnostics in fluoride side, because those are the most like mathematical, right? There's, that we can just like, I think people can easily set standards that we can measure against. The dentistry sides, is a bit harder, candidly. But that's the idea. And then I can sit there and say, hey, my average is X, and these are my outliers. And when we talk about change management, we've got to take the outliers and improve their performance. That's the way that it works. And so now I'm talking about like, okay, number one, I'm going to tell them where they stand. Here's the quality of care. And by the way, now I need to rely on my partners and the DSO operators. Like, if they're not talking to the hygienist ever, guess what? Like, we're not changing behavior, right? Like, now we're talking about something hard, right? We're talking about someone's doing something wrong, or they're not doing it the right way. A piece of data isn't going to change that. Like, it's a part of it, but we want to encourage them to like actually, converse with the provider. What are the challenges? And then from there, we're going to actually start making the provider's job easier and say, oh yeah, guess what? We're going to start giving you inside of your EHR, inside of Denticon, we're going to say, hey, Elliot's coming in. He needs an FMX. Here's an alert on your account, so that inside the EHR, we can start to actually meet the providers where they are and help them have the information to make better decisions. And then the next day, we're going to actually report back to them, and say, hey, you either did it or you didn't, right? And so I think that when I think about change management, it's about like giving, providing visibility and accountability to providers, but also then taking it the next step and saying, oh, by the way, they come to you for a raise, right? This is happening obviously everywhere. Glad I'm not in that game anymore. It's a hard one. I was like, just take it, fine. I was like, I'm the worst, raise negotiator. Gave it to everyone, but now you sit there and you say, okay, let me pull up your quality care, and you sit there and you say, hey, well, listen, I'd love to give you a raise, but you're not diagnosing perio, you're not taking FMX, and you have a bonus plan. And if you were to do that, you would actually make an extra $20 an hour, more than the 3 you want. So how can we help you get from point A to point B? That is what change. And then even more so, like, do you leverage your manufacturing partners to help educate them? What are the processes you have, and, to kind of actually elevate them? And that's where a lot of DSOs like fall down, is like, they're again, to your point, they're sitting up here. Like, we got to grow revenue, like EBITDA, great. I get that. Like, when I look at a budget or like a plan, my plan started at the baseline of like, okay, if I take more FMX, this is how much incremental FMX revenue I'm going to get. And this is what's going to happen to by the way, FMX diagnostics, right? We're going to diagnose more. We're going to get better acceptance rates. So you have to be able to not just stay up here, but actually figure out what are the specific activities and behaviors you're going to drive to drive predictable growth. So I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Yeah, no, it's great. How do you defend against the data overload? I think one of the downsides to many analytic platforms that exist today is it provides so much information. People don't necessarily know what to do with it. And I think anybody that's a data person has a tendency to be like, I'm going to give you all of this stuff. And it becomes almost overload, where depending on who's looking at it, if you're not in agreement on what really matters, people are going to extract, to your point about, look, you've looked at all sorts of data sets over many years. What's your approach to ensuring that what is presented is useful?
It's actually a great question. And honestly, like I'm guilty of that as any like data driven person generally is. So there's two ways. One is like I have other people that are, not the same type of brain that I am that are like, hey man, like this is way like no one's gonna get this. So we're constantly trying to simplify, right? Like so, we got the data now. It's like now what? How do we present it in a way that drives, value and impact? One of the things I'm really focused on, just from my experiences, is the prioritization component. And we talked about that for a second. But what we really try to do when we onboard a customer, the first thing we do is this opportunity analysis. Here's all the 100 ways you can grow your business. But my goal of doing that is to have them pick one thing. Now we have in our products, we something called initiative tracker. And there's only room for 3 initiatives right now. I'm not increasing, but ideally it's one. Most groups, if they haven't done it at scale, I'm just going to do one. So great. It's FMX. And in that initiative tracker, they're going to say, Elliot owns it. This is why we're doing it. So it ties back to our mission, vision, values. This is our goal. This is by when we're going to do it. And I have then given them all of the, just in a simple one pager. They can look at this every week and know, are we doing it or are we not? Are we tracked or not? So to me, again, like a data strategy helps with prioritization. And so we're using our product, and what we look at is we actually look at effort versus or execution risk versus EBITDA, right? Because everything's coming down to EBITDA, but then I'm taking it a step further. I'm saying, hey, perio is a huge opportunity for every group, but quite honestly, it's a hard one. Like, I don't know, like it's not as easy as FMX or fluoride or whatever. And so I'm going to sit there and say, I don't start there, especially if you don't have a hygiene leader and you've not done change at scale. Like, let's start with something that's not controversial that everyone already wants to do. And then let's build that muscle. So it's really about like one thing. And so that's why my product is like driving ROI, because we're not just being like, oh, here's 75,000 data points. Like, good luck. We're sitting there and we're saying within the product, here are the top out of 70,000 data points. Here are the 5 we'd think about, and here's the one we'd focus on. And then once we get them to upload that into the initiative tracker, we're then working with them at a customer success basis to make sure that they're getting the outcomes that they want to get. And so that's kind of how we've thought about it. But quite honestly, it's a huge challenge. And I was just talking to one of my product members, earlier, and she was like, hey, like the dashboards and stuff are like old news, but now what people want to know is like, they just want to know the answer. So like, I like to click here and click there to be like, revenue's down 5. That's because hygiene's down 10. Hygiene's down 10 because working days are less, because they were down in these 3 locations. And it's really these 7 providers are the issue. And now we're just going to say, hey, your revenue is down because these 7 in these, 3 locations, you had fewer working days. So here's how you can solve that problem. So, and then give them all the backup, right? Because, some people are going to be nerds like me, want to like click all around. But I think that's really where the paradigm is changing, where like, we need to just tell people like what, these are your biggest opportunities. These are the highest probability. This is what you need to focus on. And this is the cause of the issue that you're facing.
So are you working on that as it relates to an LLM sitting on the data set for the particular practice? Because that's the way I think to solve that. And it's what people are used to now when you're on, your whatever Safari, Chrome, whatever you use, you're doing your Google searches, and it pops up the Gemini answer on your behalf, where it's just giving you the answer. I don't even know that people are even clicking on web pages anymore and actually going to websites. They're just like, oh, here's the first paragraph that it just answered my question. And to your point here, it's like, hey, why is our production down in this particular office? You just want an answer, but you're sitting on all the data. And in the past, it did require you to click on all the different things and have an analytical mind that could come to the conclusion that these are the pieces that are leading to that decrease, whether it's doctor hours or days open or whatever the case may be, or a new clinician versus an old clinician that wasn't even there, a year ago, to your retention, the comment that you had made earlier in the conversation. So that's kind of a path to pursue. Are you guys doing that today, or is that?
Yeah, we are. So we have LLMs, and so it's not even that. Like, a lot of this is like rules-based decision making. So if you understand the workflows and the decision making trees, you can automate them. And I wouldn't even call that like AI or LLMs. Like, that's just kind of like decisions that you're driving through your business. But we are using the LLMs, and on top of that, like, we're going to add like the chatbot capability so that, because to your point, like when my original thesis was like, if I'm the CEO, like I originally built this for myself and I'm like, I want all my data in one place and I want to be able to interact with it however the hell I want to interact with it. Right. And so to your point, like by taking like clean, the hard part of this is getting clean, actionable data at scale, consistently from various data sources, not just EHR. So now I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, cool. I've got your financial data. I've got your Denticon data. I've got your Pearl data. I've got your Patient Prism data. And now you're sitting on, there's no, oh, go to this dashboard and like, look at this. And like, you have all the data going back however long you want it. And you can sit there and say, I want to know why, call answer rates were down and how that correlated to EBITDA or whatever random questions like you want, like you should just be able to interact with your data. Right. And that's where we're headed. Right. And so I think that's really, that's where this gets really interesting. And the nice thing is like, when we think about like from a competitive dynamics perspective, the products that are going to win, you have to have the vertical expertise and knowledge, like to understand the workflows and the problems you're really solving. And so, obviously there's a lot of like AI solutions coming into like certain components of the market that I won't mention because I have a lot of friends that are involved in some of them. But like, I think that like that generic, like, low hanging fruit is like, I think what I'm thinking is like, what are the bigger opportunities that are harder to solve that haven't really had any attention to date? And, again, I don't want to overuse AI, but I think to your point, like LLMs and, think about it, if I feed those LLMs with not just the data, but SOPs and process and systems and all that stuff, this is not generative. We're not going to generative at all, to be clear, not anytime soon. And I don't think dentistry is ready for that. But I do think that specialized AI that gives you access to the data, and then more importantly, like just starting to think, on the whiteboard about like, workflow automation, right? Like, I go into some of these businesses and I look at, the org structures and I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot of humans doing stuff that at this point today can be automated. Now, it can be automated for these first mover tech folks, like not me, and now I guess now I'm a tech CEO, but a year ago it wouldn't have been me. Maybe it's me now, but like there's folks that I know that are engineers that are founding companies that have taken their marketing departments massively down, right? Or their finance departments, whatever it is. And so I do think that like right now is it's the most interesting time, probably from what I understand of all time, to be an entrepreneur, because there's just this new technology that we can apply to so many different things. And my perspective is like dental is a great space because we're doing things honestly the same way we've done them, for the most part. There's been some great innovations, particularly the extra AI has been like phenomenal innovation. But overall, like we're doing things the same way. And now it's a question of, we're starting out with this hygiene and dentistry component, but, are we going to start having like, I call it co-pilot for your hygiene leader, right? We're going to have co-pilot for your CFO. We'll have co-pilot for your HR director. We're going to start to automate and improve the decision-making and workflows so that people can do more with less. And I think that's what every industry is thinking about today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny that with the AI piece, it felt overused at some point to me a couple years ago, which is kind of ironic because it wasn't even ready to be overused at that point. But it was when every single earnings call had the CEO just mention AI about 25 times to get their stock to pump. And it was like, hey, we're doing AI, nobody actually was explaining what that meant, what it was going to do for anyone. And the promise of AI was so far beyond the capabilities at the time that it seemed tiresome for those reasons. But I went through this a little where I was like, okay, I'm kind of tired of talking about AI. And now I'm on the other side of that where I'm just only wanting to talk about AI because it finally is clicking to the real potential that it has and the realization that like I have really no concept as to how much potential there really is. It's like the more you know, the more you realize that you have no clue about anything. And I'm in that phase right now of AI, just going like, this is, the more I learn, the more I'm like, this is going to be, incredible for this industry and for the world in general. A question for you, and we might disagree on this one a bit, which could be okay. Of course, coming from a practice management company, initially a lot of the analytics tools and products and companies that are out there were built to, in some ways, justify not standardizing solutions. It was a method within which you could extract data on the top layer without having to go through the challenge or the change management of implementation and standardization of a PMS solution. I still know that there's a number of organizations that have fragmented environments in the marketplace today, thankfully, because if there wasn't, then we wouldn't have as many prospects to pursue. And from our perspective, separate and apart from the standardized data integrity that benefit that you get, there's a whole bunch of operational benefits where you can actually create, the Elliot way of practicing, which many groups don't necessarily have today, a standardized SOP of expectation for each practice, because it becomes very hard to do if you're working on a multitude of different solutions. But when you think about the industry today, and of course, I know that you work with groups that where you're plugging into a multitude of systems data, and you can solve for that while you're also plugging into, like you mentioned, Patient, Prism, Pearl, all these others. But when you think about benefits or downsides, are there any to having a fragmented solution from the data standard set? We can leave out the operational efficiency or the things living inside your standard workflows, or is it really, it doesn't much matter? Like you'll make it work regardless.
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, I think that if I were to do it again, I would standardize. I think that, why would I do that? I think, is more around the operational side of things, of like just being able to have like one tech stack, like one onboarding process, one RCM process, like to start building that for like 5 PMS systems is really challenging. I will say the one place that single solution doesn't really solve the problem is on the data side. So yeah, it's easier to get the data, but you still have that same problem. Like, what do I do with it? What do I focus on? How do I get it out there? So I don't think it solves, that problem, necessarily, but, I think it's just, there's a lot of benefits to standardization, especially now, quite honestly, like you and I know, and better than I do, but like not all PMS systems are created equally now. Like, you could be on Denticon or a solution that's not innovated for 20 years. And like now you guys are payment posting and you're doing all this stuff. So like, I think there's just so much more like, value creation opportunity by tethering yourself to the right partners that are innovating, because like we just said, there's so much opportunity. And, I want to tether my ship to like people that are innovating and solving problems. So the data thing, like, you can solve it with some of these aggregators and you can, get enough data, but, to be dangerous, but you're going to, really lag on the operational side. And then I think that lag becomes more pronounced as now technology is advancing, and there's haves and have nots. There's people that can innovate and know how to change things for the better, and there's people that don't. And, I think that gap widens, and that's why you're seeing, obviously on your side, a lot of people starting to say, hey, you know what, like, we don't want to deal with this, all these different ecosystems. And maybe it's because of the data, maybe it's because of the operational, but the combination of the two is enough to say, you know what, like, we want to do this, the right way. And I don't think there's anybody that could argue that having disparate systems, is better. What they could argue is that, and I would argue potentially, is that depending on your pace of M&A and the age of your organization, this is just a maturity question of like, at what maturity level do you get to where you're ready for the, conversions at scale and all that stuff. But what I say is, like, I do see a lot more like smart, groups of founders that have done this before. They're starting out and just saying, I want to do it now, not like, but I understand the, having done it myself, of being like, man, I did 28 acquisitions in 16 months. It's like, you can't, like, there's no possible way you can, integrate and without blowing up your business. So there's times where you might say, hey, I'm going to kick this, or we're going to do it in a year or what have you. But like, sooner is better, and standardization way better than non-standardization, clearly.
Yeah. I think, when practice management software was initially created, it was almost like it just allows you to run your business. It's like, we're just going to digitize all these things that were done in paper before. And it's really, evolved, and a lot of innovation has taken place where now it helps you run your business, and it should help the business and enable a lot of the automation and other tools that you're talking about. What about data integrity? So what I mean by that is, I hear feedback when I talk to groups that are using a multitude. Maybe they got soft dent, and they've got this other sunset solution that they're still running, and they've got a bunch of EagleSoft, Entrix, other things, where there's a single database in every single practice, right? And they're server based. They live there. All the configuration and controls are within that particular organization. You can still extract that data up into a single solution. But is there a greater risk that somebody goes into that solution, changes some type of configuration, adds some new adjustment code, does something else because you don't have standardization of control at the top level, that makes things more challenging as a data aggregator? Or is most of the data that really drives decision making and kind of the FMX pieces and the things that you're talking about that are like just 100% needle movers, is it easier to get that in a consistent way, even across a multitude of solutions?
Yeah. So I think that, like we talk about like garbage in, garbage out, right? That everyone likes to talk about, like what is that component of things? I think what you're talking about is like, I would call it substantial like risk of like, data not being at all, like whole data sets being inactionable. And that does happen, right? Because of different things, sometimes a PMS conversion, sometimes people aren't, using the databases the right way. I think those are generally fewer and far between from what I've seen so far. But listen, we're seeing new stuff every day, and some of it's crazy. And I do see people all the time that like I can get their data, but they can't. You know what I mean? Because I'm normalizing it and standardizing it, but they're not seeing it. So I think there's definitely like, when I get an API, like a true API, like what I'm getting is consistent, it's clean, it's quicker. There's, no security issues exposed. Like it's way better. Right. And so, yeah, again, like, you want to be cloud-based. I mean, clearly like it's better for a million reasons. Again, it's just a question of like, what pace can people change? And so we're sort of here, like, meeting the groups where they are and saying, this is the reality of the situation today. But like I said, I mean, there's more and more groups that are, saying, hey, you know what, like, because of all these reasons, we don't want to do this. But generally, like, there's ways around the data issues, again, aside from like, we're not using our PMS the right way. But it definitely can be very challenging, and there's days around it for us, but not everyone knows how to, normalize and standardize and look at, if you don't have a data set, a piece of data in a category you're expecting it from, can you get it from another category? Like it's not, so we definitely have talked to people, that are just blind. Like they just, for whatever reason, they've done acquisitions, they've not done it the right way. They're adding codes, and that's obviously, an issue with adjustments and all that stuff, which we see all the time. And, some of that stuff, like, the problem is we can't operate to fix it operationally is so time intensive, and, not work, when we're trying to do other things in our business, and is it driving ROI, that, we're actually looking for like back end solutions to say, can we map and standardize like adjustment codes? Because I tried to do it like 4 times in my company, and like I got shot down from various people being like, and I was just, being like, hey, you got to standardize these to like 4 codes, and they'd be like rolling it out like, no one wants to do this, everyone's pissed off, like we can't execute on X initiative. And I'm like, all right, then screw it. Like it's just like, it's something that when you talk to an operator and you're like, okay, we have a great project, we're gonna standardize adjustment codes, they're gonna be like, yeah, this is not fun. Right. So, I think sometimes as data folks, we need to work on the back end to be able to give them the 20 that drives the 80. And it might not be perfect, but, I always say about data, it's like, oh, well, this isn't accurate. Okay, then do you want to use no data? Like you could do that. That's cool. But like I wouldn't. Like I'm not going to make a decision without any data. So sometimes you have to, just deal with the reality that, it's not perfect, and, we understand that, and we'll use it accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be conscious of your time. So last question here. What what are you most bullish about in dental? You're kind of looking forward. You're launching a company, which is super excited. You've launched a company. You guys have done amazing work in the year, and I've seen your product now multiple times, and every time I see it, I'm like, wow, this is so much different than the last time. So it's moving quickly, and the data that you are exposing and the way that you're building it to make it actionable is very, very cool, along with all the different connections that you're making to systems that aren't standard connected all together. But when you're thinking about, moving forward, either with your own business or just things in the industry in general that make you excited to be in dental, like you came to dental and you haven't left, what are some of those things?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to like quality of care. And when we look at it holistically, we think that on average, from what we've seen from groups, like most groups could double like 100% growth in earnings, in EBITDA, whatever you want to call it, from improving quality of care. And so I am really excited to work with more groups to help them, number one, understand that opportunity, and number two, figure out like what's the best way to drive that improvement. And I think honestly, that's what DSOs are supposed to do, right? If you're buying a business from an individual, operator that doesn't have data expertise and all this, like, then they obviously can't do that. But it's funny, like the DSO industry gets so much crap for like, oh, like now you're gonna crowns for everybody and all this stuff, which I honestly just don't see. But what I don't see either is like, are we actually elevating things, right, for our patients and quality of care, right? There's these certain things we know how to do. Okay, we're going to lower supply costs. We'll negotiate with insurers. We'll bring in specialty. Like we get that. That's yesterday's news. Like it's good. It works. But like, what's the next layer of growth? And to me, it's really about really just, helping patients understand the importance of their oral health. So they're coming in and they're accepting the treatment that, they actually need, instead of saying, oh, Dr. Zibel must need a new Porsche or whatever it is that we hear all the time. I think the industry is honestly under treating our patients. And so I think, to me, I want to start talking more about that. I've been talking about it more with leaders of some of the larger DSOs, and they've made their businesses based on doing what we're talking about, which is defining standards and measuring versus standards. And I want to start seeing the industry as a whole doing that, because we got to drive growth in a predictable, repeatable way to be able to start seeing some M&A transactions, so that we can start getting reasonably priced capital back into the dental industry, and we can start getting some deals done. Because the data I'm looking at is like 30 deals have gone to market over the past 18 months and 4 have traded. Right. And so like, I don't think people fully understand like where we are today, but like, it's not a great spot. So quite honestly, it's hard for me to be bullish, to be honest with you, on the industry, because, performance has been poor. And, I think as operators and leaders of these businesses, we have to start thinking differently about what is our role and how do we drive value in a win-win way for all stakeholders, starting with our team members and patients. Because if we don't do that right, the rest of it, just doesn't matter. It doesn't work if we can't have great people providing care and patient experience, and we're not retaining those people. And it all breaks down. So I think with the right culture and the right data, we can really drive massive growth in these businesses like Select, has, and like several of our clients have. But again, it's early days, and I think we need to start thinking about this stuff differently on the revenue side and care side, and then on the AI side of like, what are those things that can really move the needle? So the other thing I would say would be the AI, right? So RCM, finance, HR, even like components of treatment plan follow-up and presentation. Like there's just so much opportunity for disruption, and I am seeing a lot of smart people that are younger coming into dental, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and like we need to change some stuff. And like I'm super excited about like what AI can do over the coming years to not just help improve quality of care, but also help make us more efficient on the back end. But it's going to require us all like getting rid of the the beliefs that we've had about how do we do that this way, and this is how we close the books, and this is how we bank rec, and like what is possible, what is the workflow, and is this something that we can automate? I think is like the people that are going to be, and I tell this all the time, like if you actually start taking, I take AI courses, like not rocket science courses, like AI for idiots, but you got to learn about what is possible. And then when you come back to your own business, you're like, oh my God, you start to like get annoyed with yourself because you're like, I'm doing this stuff really stupidly, right? You know, if you're like me, and then you're like, okay, well, let's start experimenting. Let's automate one thing, you know, or create decision making around, and that's the start, right? So I think to me, you know, it's quality of care improvements with data, and it's leveraging AI to be more efficient.
Well said, Elliot. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. We'll talk soon.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.